Look, you don't need more rest because you're lazy. You need completion because your system has been working without an endpoint. And once you learn how to complete stress, recovery stops being a mystery. It becomes a skill that you can master. Welcome to the Personal Mastery and Growth Podcast, where we explore the keys to unlocking your full potential and living your best life. I'm your host, Jose Johnson. Whether you're looking to make a breakthrough, overcome a challenge, or simply live with greater clarity, joy, and purpose, you'll find the tools and inspirations you need right here. So let's start your journey towards personal mastery and growth right now. Welcome back to the Personal Mastery and Growth Podcast, your go-to resource for practical tips, insightful research, and inspiring stories to help you unlock your full potential. I'm your host, Jose Johnson, and I am an expert in the fields of mindfulness, mindset, and peak performance, and I am so excited to have you here with me today. Now, this episode picks up right where the last one left off, because once people start identifying energy leaks, a new question almost always follows. If I'm resting more, if I'm setting better boundaries, if I'm doing less, why don't I actually feel restored? All right, well, let's start with something honest. Most people don't need permission to rest. Well, they already know they should. They take time off, they slow down, they unplug, and yet they still wake up tired. They rest, but they feel restless. They take breaks that don't actually restore anything. And that creates a second layer of frustration because now they're thinking, well, why isn't this working? Well, this episode is here to answer that question. Look, we've been taught a very simple equation. Stress leads to rest, and rest leads to recovery. But for a lot of people, the equation actually looks like this. Stress leads to rest, which leads to you still feeling tired. Well, that's not a failure of discipline, and it's not a mindset problem. And it's not because you're doing rest wrong. It's because rest and recovery are not the same thing. Rest is a pause. Rest is a pause. Recovery is a process. And most people pause without completing what their nervous system is still holding on to. Now, from a nervous system perspective, recovery doesn't mean doing nothing. It means returning to baseline. It means the body and the brain are receiving the message, the threat has passed, the demand is complete, I don't need to stay mobilized. Now, if that message doesn't land, the system stays partially activated, even in stillness, even in sleep, even on vacation. All right, well, here's a pattern worth naming. The people who struggle most with recovery are often capable, reliable, resilient, used to functioning under pressure. They don't collapse easily. They adapt. They push through. They stay productive. They hold it together. And because they can still function, the nervous system never gets a clear endpoint. The stress didn't end. It just became background noise. Now, there's a state that is called functional depletion. You're still performing, you're still showing up, you're still checking the boxes, but everything takes more effort than it should. Your patience is thinner, your motivation is lower, your emotional bandwidth is reduced. You're not burned out, you're just unfinished. And so stress at a biological level, it's not a feeling. It's a physiological sequence. When your brain detects a challenge, your body releases a cascade of chemicals, primarily adrenaline and cortisol, and they're designed to mobilize energy. Now, this response is efficient, it's fast, but it's meant to be temporary. In healthy stress cycles, three things happen. First, activation. Next is the action or response. And third is the completion and the return to baseline. But here's the modern problem. Most of today's stressors don't have a clear physical endpoint. There's no sprint, there's no fight, there's no visible all clear sign. Instead, there are ongoing demands, unresolved conversations, emotional labor without closure, pressure that rolls forward instead of resolving. So the chemistry initiates, but it never fully clears. The body stays partially mobilized because, biologically speaking, the job isn't done yet. So, what does the nervous system need to stand down? Well, your nervous system doesn't calm down because you decide to relax. It calms down when it receives evidence of safety and completion. Now, from a neuroscience perspective, this involves the shift from sympathetic activation, which is mobilization, to parasympathetic regulation. That's your rest and restoration. But here is the nuance most people miss. You can be resting physically while still being activated neurologically. Now, this is why lying on the couch doesn't feel restorative, why meditation feels agitating instead of calming, why sleep doesn't fully recharge you. If your brain hasn't registered completion, it keeps scanning, and scanning uses energy. So, in other words, you can stop moving without stopping mobilization. And that's not a failure of willpower. That's just how the nervous system works. And this is where high functioning analytical people get stuck. They assume that if they understand the problem, if they analyze it, if they talk it through, that their system should calm down. But stress chemistry doesn't clear through insight alone. It resolves through experience. And there are three primary ways the nervous system completes a stress response. So let's explore them. First is physical discharge. Physical discharge is about moving stress out of the body. When stress mobilizes energy, your system expects that energy to go somewhere. Movement, shaking, stretching, walking, even deep exhalation can help signal the action phase is complete. Now, this is why a walk after a tense meeting can feel so relieving. Your body is finishing what the stress response started. Second is emotional expression. Now, this is about allowing feeling without managing it. Stress often includes emotions that never get space to move, frustrations that are swallowed, sadness that's postponed, anger that's redirected into self control. When emotion is acknowledged through journaling, naming it out loud, or simply letting it move through without fixing it, the nervous system receives the message this doesn't need to stay contained. Expression completes what suppression prolongs. And finally, cognitive closure. Now, cognitive closure is about signaling that the mental loop can end. This doesn't mean solving the problem or knowing the outcome. It simply means marking the moment as finished. Sometimes that can look like writing a final note, making a decision, even if it's a small one, consciously saying, "This is done for now." Closure tells the brain you don't need to keep scanning. You can stand down now. Most stress lingers not because it's intense, but because none of these completion signals ever arrived. Now, when stress cycles don't complete, the body adapts, not by shutting down, but by conserving. This is where functional depletion sets in. You still operate, you still perform, but at a higher energetic cost. Now, from a physiological standpoint, cortisol remains elevated, but at lower levels. Attention narrows more quickly. Emotional regulation requires more effort. Recovery time lengthens. Now, over time, this creates a mismatch. You look capable on the outside, but you feel depleted on the inside. And this is one reason burnout often feels sudden. The system didn't fail, it just finally ran out of buffer. Now, so this leads us to the question of why rest can't do this job alone. Rest reduces stimulation, completion reduces activation. They're related, but they're not interchangeable. Rest gives the nervous system space, completion gives it resolution. And without resolution, rest can even backfire because when things get quiet, unfinished stress becomes more noticeable. Now, that's why some people feel anxious when they slow down, emotional when they stop, restless during the night. The silence didn't cause the discomfort, it just revealed what hasn't been finished. Now, the second half of this episode, we're going to explore what completion actually looks like in real life, the 3 forms of completion that your nervous system needs, why talking it out isn't always enough, and a completion practice that you can use without withdrawing, shutting down, or disengaging from life. For now, sit with this. If rest hasn't been restoring you, it doesn't mean you're broken. It means something inside of you is still waiting to be finished. Rest pauses the system. Completion resets it. And until something completes, recovery will always feel out of reach. All right, now that we have clarified why rest alone doesn't restore energy, the natural question becomes, what does completion actually look like? Because for most people, completion sounds abstract. Or worse, it sounds like fix everything, resolve every issue, get closure from everyone involved. Look, that's not what we're talking about here. Completion is not resolution. Completion is biological finality. It's your nervous system receiving a signal. The mobilization phase is over. Nothing more, nothing dramatic. All right, so here is a simple framework to hold on to. I call this the completion loop. We start with activation, which is the stress that mobilizes our energy. That leads to expression or action. Something responds to that mobilization. And then we have a completion signal. The system stands down. Now, most people get stuck between steps 2 and 3. They respond, but they never signal completion. So the system keeps waiting. Now, there are 3 pathways to completion, and we touched on these in part 1 of this episode. Now, let's apply them. There are 3 primary completion pathways, and you don't need all 3 every time. You need one that fits the moment. So there's physical completion. Now, this is for stress that mobilizes the body. So, for example, you have tension after a meeting. You have restlessness at the end of the day. You feel fatigue with agitation underneath. So completion here might look like walking without a destination, shaking out the arms and the shoulders, slow, deliberate stretching, extended exhalations. The goal is not exercise. The goal is discharge. You're telling the body, you don't need to hold this anymore. Next is emotional completion. Now, this is for stress that involved felt experience, especially emotions that you had to contain, things like frustration, sadness, disappointment, grief. Completion here might look like naming the emotion out loud, journaling without editing, letting yourself feel without trying to fix, being witnessed without advice. Now, this isn't about venting endlessly. It's about allowing emotion to move instead of staying trapped. And cognitive completion. Now, this is for stress that lives in loops. So, for example, you find yourself replaying conversations, rehearsing future scenarios, unresolved decisions. Completion here might look like writing a final thought and closing a notebook. Making a good enough decision. Consciously saying, this is complete for today. Now, cognitive completion is about ending the scan. All right, now this is important to understand. Completion can feel uncomfortable. Why? Because the nervous system may have adapted to staying mobilized. Stillness feels unfamiliar. Completion feels vulnerable. Some people experience emotion when they slow down, fatigue once the adrenaline drops, resistance to stopping. Now, none of this means you're doing it wrong. It just means the system is finally standing down. Hey there, feeling stuck? Spinning your wheels? Are you ready for a breakthrough? Well, then you need to hear this because I've got something that will supercharge your growth this year, and it's called the Mindset Makeover. Now, it's my new book and course that are designed to help you upgrade the mental software that drives your success. And inside, you're going to discover the mindsets that shape every decision, every habit, and every result. And you'll learn the science-backed tools to rewire your thinking for clarity, confidence, and unstoppable momentum. So whether you're aiming higher, trying to break free from old patterns, or finally stepping into that version of yourself that you know that you're capable of becoming, well, this is your launch pad. So don't wait. Head over to josejohnson.com/mindset to grab the book, join the course, or get both together. Again, that's josejohnson.com/mindset. And remember, it is what it is, but it becomes what you make it. And with the Mindset Makeover, you can make it something extraordinary. All right, so let's slow this way down because this is where everything we've talked about becomes practical. Now, up to this point, we've been reframing recovery. Now, we're going to teach your nervous system how to complete. Now, this is not a productivity tool, and it's not a stress hack, and it's not another thing to optimize. This is about giving your system the signal that it's been waiting for. The work's done. You can stand down now. So before we get into the steps, let's be very clear about intention. This practice is not about fixing your life, resolving every stressor that you encounter, processing everything at once. It is about finishing one incomplete stress cycle, releasing one pocket of stored activation, creating a clear biological endpoint. Now, completion works best when it's small, specific, and repeatable. So if you feel the urge to do all of it, I want you to pause. We're working with capacity, not ambition. So step one, identify what your system is still holding. Once a day, ideally near the end of the day, pause and ask, what feels unfinished right now? Now, don't look for the biggest problem. Instead, tune into your body and ask yourself, where do I still feel tight, braced, or alert? What keeps pulling my attention back? What feels like it never quite got to end? Now, this step is about listening, not solving. Now, very often, the thing your system is holding is smaller than you expect. A conversation that lingered, a decision that stayed open, an emotional moment that you moved past a little too quickly. Your nervous system already knows. You're just letting it speak. Step two, name the dominant channel of activation. Now ask yourself, where is this stress primarily living? Now, there are three possibilities. Now, this is important because completion only works when it matches the channel of activation. It could be physical activation, and that feels like tension, restlessness, agitation, fatigue with an edge. Or it could be emotional activation. Now, this feels like sadness that never moved, frustration that was swallowed, disappointment that you didn't acknowledge, grief that you postponed. Or it can be cognitive activation. Now, this feels like replaying, rehearsing, scanning, looping thoughts. You're not labeling for insight. You're labeling so the nervous system gets the right kind of signal. Now, step 3, choose one completion pathway, not all 3. Now, this is where people often overdo it. You don't need to complete stress in every way. You just need to focus on one clear signal and choose the pathway that matches what you identify. So if you need physical completion, that's discharge. If your body feels mobilized, it needs movement, not explanation. Now, if it's emotional completion, you need expression. Because if emotion is what's staying trapped, it needs permission, not fixing. Now, if it's cognitive completion, you need closure. So if your mind is looping, it needs a clear endpoint. Look, you're not solving the future. You're just trying to end the scan. Your brain simply needs to know, I don't need to keep tracking this right now. Now, step 4, mark the end on purpose. Now, this step is critical and it's often skipped. After you complete the action, mark the moment. Say out loud, if you can, that's done. I've finished this for today. I don't need to carry this anymore. This is not about affirmations. It's instruction. You're helping your nervous system register finality. And without this step, the system may stay on half alert. Now, step 5, stay still long enough to notice. After completion, pause. Don't reach for your phone. Don't jump back to the next task. Just notice your breath, your body, your internal state. You may start to feel relief, or you may notice fatigue, an emotional softness, quiet. Now, all that's normal, and it means activation is finally resolving. And step 6, repetition, not perfection. Completion is not a one-time fix. It's a relationship with endings. So for the next 7 days, complete one small stress cycle per day. Use the same pathways if it works, and let repetition do the teaching. Consistency matters more than intensity. Now, why does this practice restore your energy? Well, here's probably the most important takeaway. Energy is not always gone. Sometimes it's just locked up in unfinished cycles. When stress completes, your capacity returns. Rest, well, it starts to work again. Boundaries begin to feel easier. Self-trust, it begins to strengthen. And recovery stops feeling fragile. So here's the reframe to take with you. Rest supports recovery. Completion enables it. When completion becomes part of your rhythm, rest works better. Downtime feels safer. Slowing down feels less threatening. Recovery becomes something you participate in, not something that you wait for. Look, you don't need more rest because you're lazy. You need completion because your system has been working without an endpoint. And once you learn how to complete stress, recovery stops being a mystery. It becomes a skill that you can master. All right, so if this episode helped you to understand why rest hasn't been restoring you, please share it with someone who's been feeling quietly depleted. And don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe so that you don't miss what's next in the integration series. So remember, it is what it is, but it becomes what you make it. So make it great. Thanks for tuning in. Before we wrap up, I just want to remind you that the information shared in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute for professional advice or treatment. While the content of this podcast is based on research and personal experience, everyone's situation is unique, and the advice given may not be applicable to all. Always consult a qualified professional before making significant changes in your life. The Personal Mastery and Growth podcast is recorded at the So Good Media Studios located in the Candy Factory, a co-working space in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.